Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
If ghosts aren't remnants of the dead, what are they? Could vampires really exist? Can ghosts write books?
Hey there, and welcome to the 511th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I'm Ben, and those varied questions came from my co-host and partner in the paranormal, my dad. And this evening we bring you the second of two open line shows, so we begin to catch up on some of our many excellent questions that came in from our listeners. Not our questions, they are your questions that came in to us, and we are just getting around to some of them. We also welcome your phone calls. The number locally is 401-766-1240, and anywhere in the U.S. or Canada, 800-449-1240. So let's get this ball rolling.
All right. We'll start with a bunch of questions that came in on Facebook. This is from Tony Garrett in Melbourne, Australia.
Alrighty, so Tony writes to us.
A lot of listeners in Australia for some reason.
No, Australia's a fun place, full of fun people.
I thought so.
Okay, so Tony writes to us, are curses real or are they in the mind of the beholder? In Australia, the shamans can do a thing called pointing the bone, and people have died.
Yeah, I heard about that when I was there. Well, curses. It's funny because I was in the Travel Channel production, The Curses of New England. I'm not aware of anybody around here who points the bone at anybody, but I actually had a conversation. Part of my conversation with an Australian Aboriginal elder in 1979 was on that very subject, curses. And I said essentially, you fellas kind of do that a lot. He said, well, no, we don't really, but he admitted it really depends on whether someone believes it or not. But of course, most of the people believe it. So, and he also said it's very interesting that the custom of considering pointing your finger at someone to be impolite is because from time out of mind, shamans pointed their finger at you to put a curse on you. That's an oversimplification, but that was part of it. So that's why according to him, that's why it's impolite to point your finger at people.
That's interesting.
So
yeah, I can see that. Yeah. I can see that being a reason for it. It's like why fire is so big in our culture is because we needed it to survive, that sort of thing. It's like people who were taking care of the fire back in the days of our ancient Neanderthal ancestors. They would make the people who were in control of the fire the leaders of the tribe or whatever.
Really? All right. Well,
I may be butchering that completely, but I just remember, I don't know why that popped into my head.
Well, it certainly was important.
Yeah.
Some of the fires that we've had in some of these old New England towns, though, where everything's made of wood, have not been pleasant experiences, of course.
No.
All right. No. Well, in any case, curses, I tend to think it is more in the eye of the beholder, as Tony writes. What power do these things have? It's kind of the reverse of, I suppose, objects that do positive things or help you do positive things. This is kind of a sort of an inverted sense of the kind of question that we often get. If you have holy water or if you have a cross, will you be safer in paranormal situations? Okay. And the answer very often is yes, but you really need to have the faith that goes with it. I mean, Jesus did all these miracles, but he didn't force it on people. He said, your faith has made you well, or whatever the case may have been. So you participate in that. Everything that has to do with the paranormal requires your participation if you're going to experience in it in some way. So I think that if you believe it, it's most likely to happen. I think that the belief in curses and this kind of thing is deep within us. Maybe it's even in our DNA in some way, because everyone, even the most, I suppose, rational, so quote-unquote, people whom I know will say that they kind of get a twinge of something, a little bit nervousness when someone is really negative or says a very negative thing to them, that kind of business. So,
yeah.
Have you run into any of that? Because you've done a little bit of shamanic research and training and stuff like that.
Well,
that ever come up?
No, surprisingly.
Well, good, I suppose, any kind of negativity.
I'd stay away from that stuff.
Well, there is a strong belief, and I think it's a legitimate one, that if you bring in negativity like that, it will be sort of returned to you with kind of boomerangs. I'm supposed to stick with the Australian theme. It kind of boomerangs on you. The negative.
Now we just need to make a kangaroo pun and we're all set.
All right, I'm working on it. We could bounce right into that, I suppose.
Did you...
So, but I think that it is largely a matter of your own faith, even in the negative, that kind of thing. There are real negative things out there. There is real evil. Which
I remember as a kid, you told me like never to do stupid things, or it'll come back to you at some point.
Oh, did I? Well, I was right, I think.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so I think that is pretty much in the eye of the beholder, but that doesn't mean that you should expose yourself to these things or to discount them, because there's always something beyond yourself, really. And if parasites are involved, that takes some caution. Parasites being the entities we always talk about as, I suppose, what is commonly known in folklore as demonic beings or things of this kind. There do seem to be life forms that do feed upon negative stuff. I don't think they're, servants of the devil in that sense. Theologically, that's how we make ourselves understand them. But nevertheless, it is a real problem. So yeah, I think that's a good question, Tony. Thank you for asking it. And I think beware of it, but I don't think that you have no control over it. I think that's the thing. All these paranormal situations, you have a certain amount of control. Don't let it control you. All right, here's one from Helena Marquez. Doesn't say where she's from.
Alrighty, so Helena writes to us. I just read your book, Turning Home, and I see your point, but if ancient people always associate the intruders or visitors that mess with us as sky people, how could they come from other times and places in the multiverse?
I think I can see what Helen is getting at here. Well, I made many points in Turning Home. A lot of people don't like that book because it wasn't like the two before that, which had a lot of case histories and stuff. This was a lot of
throwing off the
philosophy and interpretation.
Flow.
Yeah, and so a lot of my traditional readers didn't particularly like. A lot of them, people either love it or hate it. Turning Home, God, Ghosts, and Human Destiny. But in any case...
Can't imagine what the next one's going to be. What the next one's reception is going to be.
Well, you're the co-author. What do you mean I can't imagine what well, actually, the next one is supposed to be the Dancing Past the Graveyard, which I've yet to finish.
That's the one I'm talking about.
I keep finding stuff I want to add to it. That's only, 4 years? Oh, dear. Well, we'll get it done.
Maybe another decade it'll come out.
Yeah, well, whatever. Time flies and you're having fun. Okay, intruders or visitors that Helena is referring to are... This gets into the ancient astronauts, so-called kind of thing. There are lots of things on the cable channels that some of them seem to be just paranormal channels now, of one level of quality or another. And the intruders or visitors, I think there is something to that, but I'm not necessarily convinced that whoever messed with us. One of the things that really did it for me, Ben, was when the Human Genome Project occurred in the last decade. Yeah. And that found, what it attempted to do was map the entire human genome, all the genes, the whole bunch of DNA sequences that makes us human, right, as opposed to chimps or something, right? So that came up with a very strange finding that there are 223 genes in the human sequence that shouldn't be there, that came from somewhere that did not match the evolutionary history of the human species, supposedly. And what does that mean? Does it mean someone put them there, or where did it come from? The best the scientists could do, at least the last I heard, was that they were able to suggest that there was some sort of quote, horizontal transfer from bacteria. Now, what that may mean, I have no idea. I'm no biologist, but for heaven's sake. I mean, like, what's it called? Like that space dust that our planet travels through, like... Well, yeah, that's the panspermia theory that was advanced by someone I greatly admired, Sir Fred Hoyle, the great British astronomer. And he suggested that, as we've said on the show before, that life is not the exception in the universe. It is not a rarity. It is the rule. Right. Many, many different kinds of life. The kind of things we believe we run into in paranormal research in different cases that are not human and are still around. So that's something that occurred to me as far as these intruders or visitors were concerned. I think there was some kind of intrusion, or probably many kinds, from what we often think of as parallel worlds. This is postulated in quantum physics, the fringe areas of physics, where the math seems to indicate beyond a doubt that we are conscious of just one manifestation of reality, and that there are many parallel ones right next to us, and in which all possibilities occur. That this is what many physicists believe. Now, this is how they interpret the science. It's really weird, and it's kind of scary. It's not very scary, but that's apparently the way it is, and we believe this explains the paranormal. So what we're getting at here, Helena, is that these intruders or visitors that I talk about in the book Turning Home were, I think, of two kinds. Early on, there were, I think, parasitical influences. These entities seem to, they're not human, they're not demons in any classical sense. I've run into them in poltergeist cases on a number of occasions. Ben and I have run into them on a number of occasions, working together. We believe they are simply life forms who have access to a number of different parallel worlds, crazy as it sounds, and they seem to live, if you want to say, between worlds. They seem to have, I've seen them working in several worlds at the same time, almost like you might think of an octopus reaching into a number of different whatever spaces.
Well, her question was not what is it, but how.
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, if these are, okay, all right, well, let's shift gears here. Whoever these intruders or visitors were who influenced us, who were not parasites, I believe there were some human intrusions by accident or design.
But you're saying if they came from the sky and landed...
Well, I don't think it's that they were necessarily ancient space travelers. They might have been, but what kind of was the giveaway for me was that you've got DNA work apparently going on. There seems to have been, and this is from the ancient documents, not just Genesis, if you read it in the original Hebrew, also several other documents from the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Sumerians, that were contemporary with Genesis. They talk about really agricultural experiments and really genetic experiments with DNA, taking saliva and blood from one of these travelers and using it to manipulate the native population. Apparently to turn them into some kind of workers. I mean, as weird as this sounds, this is what it says. So what we're talking about here is, if these are alien visitors, you would have to have very, very similar DNA to theirs in order for them to manipulate it. Now, of course, we're talking about there is gene splitting now, and things that like this can be manipulated, but it can be difficult to conceive on the face of it that these would not be humans themselves. And whether humans live on other planets is a big open question. I mean, I tend to rather doubt it. I mean, aliens would be alien, I would think. So that's why my suspicion is that they came from the sky, sure, but in aircraft, perhaps, not necessarily in spaceships.
Well, that's like saying if somebody comes from, like, Atlanta to, like, Woonsocket or whatever, and they flew here, then it's like, well, how do we know they're from Atlanta?
Well, particularly because there's no airport in Woonsocket.
Right. Well, right. The point being is that just because they came from the sky doesn't mean that they
came from outer space.
Right.
Right. Because when you see, and again, where do I get this? Well, you're looking back on a number of cases that I have in my files about people who disappeared. Sometimes with their cars. Sometimes, of course, we're all familiar, perhaps, with the so-called Bermuda Triangle and the phenomena that allegedly occur there. There have indeed been many disappearances, regardless of the cause. But it is possible that we always say these multiversal boundaries do cross at times. They overlap these worlds, and you can see perhaps creatures you're not used to seeing in this world, and all this stuff can happen. It seems chaotic, but it does seem to be a rather elegant system. So in the same way, groups of people with their equipment might vanish, and have. Where did they go? If they were not lost or crashed or end up at the bottom of the ocean, it is possible that they could have crossed one of these world boundaries, and I think that that's what I'm talking about in that book,
right.
Based on the question that Helen is asking. So they aren't necessarily aliens from other planets. Could be, but I rather doubt it. I think they're us, perhaps from another time or place in the multiverse, another place that might not even exist in our particular consciousness stream. And whoever it was seems to have had, the ancient documents talk about them flying around in craft, visiting each other. They became the gods of various cities. The cities were named after them. It's all in Turning Home, God, Ghost, and Human Destiny, which is available on Amazon.com if you want to buy it. But anyway, they're not new ideas, but I tend to think that they were not from necessarily other planets. But, again, who knows? All right. Long answer to a short question. Sorry about that. This is from Marie in Attleboro, Massachusetts.
Alrighty, so Marie writes to us, I've always been interested in UFOs and wanted to get to the UFO conference in October to meet you, but I could not. One of the biggest mysteries to me is the idea that a crowd of people can be in the same place, but some see the UFO and some do not. Have you seen that, and what is it about? I also think people should pay more attention to your idea that aliens could be parasites and parasites could be aliens. I think I had an experience like that.
Okay. First of all, the conference that Marie refers to was the first New England UFO conference in Leominster, Massachusetts in October, organized brilliantly by our good friend Steve Fermani, and you'll be hearing more about the next one in 2014 as soon as we have information on that. Ben and I usually are there in one form or another, doing something of interest. And
to answer her question.
To answer her question, all right. Well, okay. This is a question I've always had too, Marie. People often will they'll be in a group, and I'm thinking of several cases, one or two in Connecticut, and a number of cases in South America where groups of people have been talking about seeing UFOs, and people in the same group will not see the UFO.
Well, you know what's a little fun thing about that? Sorry to cut you off.
No, yes, right.
There was an interesting scientific conclusion that came to a human vision. It turns out that we all have selective sight, where our brain sort of picks and chooses what it wants to see. So it's like how people can hide in plain sight and stuff like that, because the person who is pursuing them, their brain is picking and choosing what they want to see. So your brain picks and chooses what it wants to see all they want, which is why I have trouble reading out loud, because my brain picks and chooses what it wants to read.
Well, to build a little bit upon that, when we are our instincts are geared to seeing and sensing danger. So we're going to see things. The first things we're going to see are things that might be a danger to us.
Right.
And something from the unknown, a large craft or whatever these things may be in any case. I would think that would be one of the first things you'd see. The thought on this, such as it is that these things are piloted craft by somebody, or perhaps even living things themselves, that have some way of manifesting across world boundaries that are apparent to some people and not to others.
Right.
Because some people are sensitive to that and not to others. But I don't know if that's good enough. Well, how do you think that might work? Because there are so many examples of these groups seeing things. I mean, short of what we used to call, the group hysteria, or.
Well, I wouldn't say it's group hysteria. I don't even know if I'd call it.
In psychology.
Well, I don't know if it would even be like schizophrenia or whatever, because if it's a group of people, I mean, that sort of lends credence to the experience. But I'm going to stick with what I was mentioning earlier, in that the brain picks and chooses what it wants to see.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah.
I'm going to stick with that. Or you could go the really weird route and say that the UFO reveals itself to different people. I mean, yeah. I'm not really sure, honestly. I'm not well versed enough to give a concrete explanation or whatever.
You know, I think back to that report we received from someone in Connecticut who said that they saw a UFO, and this I think was part of the Hudson Valley sightings that occurred.
Right.
Large groups of people saw these things, but again, some people did not. In the Hudson Valley of New York, along Route 80, I believe it's Route 89 there, the Northway as they call it. But this fellow was in Connecticut, and he said that this craft, he was walking to his front door, a craft passed over a neighboring house, and he felt as if he was being tested. That was his word. And I've mentioned that several times, but I can't get over that. It's a very interesting way to put that. But many other people who were on the street at the same time driving, but nobody else reported. Only two other people, as I recall, reported seeing that same craft. So if it's only one person out of a bunch, you say, well, maybe it's a little fluky, or they just imagined it, or it's some other thing. But when you have large numbers of people who see it and large numbers of people who don't in the same place at the same time, that's, I think, what we're getting at in this question that Marie's asked here. So, another thing, Ben, that comes to mind is some of the sightings of a religious nature. I'm thinking particularly of the sightings of the Virgin Mary at Medjugorje in Europe, in the former Yugoslavia, as it's sometimes referred to. There were people in huge numbers who saw things, and other people who did not. The famous so-called miracle of the sun, which occurred at Fatima in Portugal in I believe it was 1917, if I'm not mistaken, was a miracle recognized by the Roman Catholic Church, and there was first of all, you shouldn't stare at the sun anyway. So there have been speculation maybe it was a UFO, and there were also reports that was a fairy cave for centuries.
That sounds less crazy.
Well, yeah, I mean the place is saturated with paranormal folklore. Many of these places are. So in any case, I don't really know how to answer the question, Marie. There's no solid answer to that. But again, I think Ben may be onto something, that the things we experience are very much having to do with our brain and what it chooses to see. And now your final point, you think people should pay more attention to the idea that aliens could be parasites and parasites aliens. We've often said that many of these experiences could be interpreted in the context in which we experience them. For example, as they often say, if you're in your house and a sort of gauzy cloud-like figure goes by, or actually see someone walk by, aha, it's a ghost. If you're out in your yard and you see it and there's a ball of light or a disc over it, aha, it's an alien. So we've often found that people have interpreted, and there's a case in Florida now that we've been taking a look at there through several of our well-known contacts down there in the UFO field, of UFO cases that seem to intersect with ghost cases. We've run into that a lot. If you look for it, you find all sorts of connections that would, in traditional paranormal research, would be considered hard to accept. All right. So again, I think many people might just be interpreting it according to the context. We do find that sometimes these grays or whatever will turn out to be parasites, or vice versa. Mostly they turn out to be parasites, though, sometimes. And Nigel Kerner in England, whom we've had on the show several times, not this edition, but the CBS edition, believes that that's really precisely what they are, that they are after our energy and this sort of thing, and that they're not good folks at all. So that's probably the best we can do with that one. The next one is from Tammy K. Doesn't say where she's from.
All right. Tammy K writes to us. It was amazing to hear you guys with Bill Hall on the Lanley Street poltergeist case. My dad was one of the people in the crowd outside the house that cold week. He says he remembers seeing you come out. It always has seemed strange to me that so many things can happen in such a small house. The gossip around the area at the time was that it was the ghost of the dead son that was jealous of the little girl. I know you don't think that, but how has your view changed over the last 40 years?
Well, one's views do change over 40 years. Well, we dealt with this case certainly last week with Bill Hall, who was a very nice fellow who was provided me with some very interesting information today about some stuff I didn't know about this case. This was in November 1974, just very briefly. November 24th was a Sunday. I was on my way to the home of Ed and Lorraine Warren, who are now well known for the Conjuring film, the case in the Conjuring film, which I will not comment on. And Lorraine was a really tremendous cook. And I couldn't wait to get down. We were going to have dinner and have a nice visit, but it was not to happen. This case was breaking in Bridgeport, about 10 miles from where they lived, and so I walked right into the middle of that and went down with them and Father William Charbonneau, a priest of the Archdiocese of Hartford at the time. I myself was a seminary student, and the four of us kind of moved in on this and were there for the better part of 2.5, 3 days in this house, and all kinds of amazing poltergeist events occurred, and I began to really rethink many of the ideas that I'd had. It was my first major poltergeist case. I'd been involved since 1971, so 3 years in paranormal research, and it was really a difficult situation for me because nothing made sense. I knew that there were houses where things flew around, and supposedly the child, and there was one in the house, who'd now be 49 years old, was the center of the phenomena. Objects were moving. I was hit by things several times, injured in one case. Police and firefighters witnessed this. There were all sorts of police reports on this, and Mr. Hall is writing a book about this, and I think it's going to be really interesting. As a matter of fact, I'm one of the few surviving major eyewitnesses, major in the sense of being in the house for several days and for long periods. So in any case, it was a very small house. It was just a little bungalow, but you'd be surprised what was going on in there. All the more difficult for the child to have caused these things. That was my job, was to keep an eye on little Marcy to see that she was not doing any of these things herself. 300-pound refrigerators, things like that. All right, so at this point we're going to take a break, and we'll finish up the question in just a moment. So you're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley, and we'll be right back.
Lou Mandeville here to tell you the only place to get your local high school and college scores, as well as the Pats, Bruins, Celtics, and Sox, is on my morning sports reports. And they are right here on ON 1240, Monday through Friday on the Morning Fun Show.
Okay, we wanted, of course, to remind you about the charities Ben and I have adopted. There is, of course, USA Cares, Builders Helping Heroes. This is all .org, usacares.org. BuildersHelpingHeroes.org, which is a local Rhode Island charity which has worked with Homes for Our Troops to build a home in Burrillville, Rhode Island for the Dubois family. Corporal Kevin Dubois, U.S. Marines, lost both his legs in Afghanistan, and this house is being specially adapted for him and brand new, built. The key ceremony will be on the 21st of this month of December on Sherman Farm Road in Burrillville. Great project. A lot of people worked on it. Tremendous charity effort, and they are a very deserving young couple who are going to receive this house. Also, Canadian Veterans Advocacy. Check that out as well. CanadianVeteransAdvocacy.org. Great charity from our neighbors and friends who have been with us in the War on Terror in Canada. So check that out as well. Also, the Milk Fund here locally in northern Rhode Island. Marvelous charity, an auction here at WOON. Check out onworldwide.com for information. And we are going to be an hour earlier broadcast next week. I will tell you about that at the end of the show in order to accommodate a Milk Fund fundraiser. So there we are. So let's just finish up the note here from Tammy about the Bridgeport poltergeist outbreak of 1974, as I call it, also known as the Lindley Street case. I heard at the time that this ghost thing was rumored to be the cause. I don't believe that, as Tammy points out. The older couple, middle-aged, I guess to me they were older. I was 21 at the time.
Yeah, there you go.
I must be ancient to you, Ben. So they were in their 40s. They had a son who had passed away before, earlier in their lives, and they had adopted Marcy, who was an Iroquois Indian descent, a girl from Canada, and that was naturally people began speculating. You got stuff going on in the house. Must be a ghost. Therefore, must be the son. This is the logic that we use, and I don't believe any of that really at all. I think this was a parasite situation from start to finish. And her final question, I know you do not think that's what it was, but how has your view changed over almost 40 years? Well, again, especially the experiences on the Monday night of the case, the day after we had gotten there was, I would call it an attack by 4 entities. You could see these gauzy structures, which Mr. Hall says other witnesses have reported as well. And they came down, they attacked the child. I was trying to protect her. I had a physical altercation with one of these things, which kind of threw me for a loop, not just because it was ultra scary, but because these things seemed to be physical. They didn't seem to be spirits in any sense. And all along, of course, with my seminary background, I was assuming these were demons in this business. And that really began to change my thinking. So all you have to do is listen to some of our podcasts of this show, and we make pretty clear what I think over the past 40 years. My opinions have changed, of course, on that. So there we are. That's probably the best way I can answer that. But thank you for asking the question, and it's really cool that your I guess it was your father was outside the house, and
yeah,
at the time there were a lot of people gathered around that house. All right, the next one is from Diana Dancero, and it just says Rhode Island.
Alrighty, so Diana writes to us, I have found your ideas on ghosts interesting, to say the least. If they are not spirits of the dead, why do they act like it? why do they come through mediums and talk about their lives? I think some might be otherworld people, like you say, but I still think there are spirits of the dead.
Take it away, Ben.
Well, I mean, no, you take it away. I'll jump in.
All right.
I need to develop my thoughts here.
Okay. Well, this is a basic question that we often get, and when paranormal experiences occur, and what is the paranormal? Well, that's a misnomer. Paranormal is entirely normal. It is the normal state of the planet, the normal state of the universe, which is what? The multiverse. These worlds seem to interact all the time. There is an elegance and an order to it. It doesn't seem like it to us because we have a very narrow point of view. We operate from very narrow framework, very narrow thinking, and we think that what we see is what we get all around us, and it's not. Every possibility, as we say, exists out there, all simultaneously. Einstein began to prove this, and it's now pretty much accepted. There is no past. There is no future. It's all simultaneous, and it all depends on our awareness and our perception. So the idea of ghosts being spirits of the dead is a problem for me because you can't have death. When there's no past, everything's simultaneous, death is impossible. Sure, and especially when there are many, many versions of you and us and me and everybody out there in the multiverse in some time or space, elsewhere or else when, and it's all us, it's all one being, you can't really have death. Sure, we go to funerals, we go to cemeteries and bury people, but for heaven's sake, I don't believe in death even for the body, because that body exists in many parallel worlds, and that's why we see people who have died, but then it's not their ghosts, it's them in parallel worlds where they never died.
What does it mean to act like a ghost?
Well, I think I can see what Diana means here.
They act like a dead person.
Well, I mean, that's what I mean. Dead people would be dead. They wouldn't act at all in any way. So that's what that hit me in my first case in 1971. That these people weren't acting like they were dead at all. Never mind in some
Plus,
other
if they're
state.
speaking through mediums, how do you know what it's actually
that's
saying?
the thing.
Yeah,
that always struck me. People believe they just buy this. How do you know? First of all, the media is not faking it. Medium, I should say. Media fake it too. And how do you know that what's coming through, if there really is something, is what it says it is? That's a really dangerous assumption.
Yeah, it is.
We've seen that time and again. And especially young people. These parasites will prey on, among other things, young people who are lonely and down and out and bitter and angry and fearful. And you often see it. Remember that we've had a number of cases where the young person is sort of holed up. They hardly ever come out of their room. They're using a Ouija board.
Yeah.
And the parents are upset. They don't know what to do because they don't know anything about this either. And what's happening is that the young people they feel like failures. They're angry and bitter. But they have this cosmic being or this enlightened guide or whatever you want to call it coming through this board paying attention to them. That's a big deal when you're a young person. And it's unimaginably dangerous.
Well, I mean, it's just like weird that it's not questioned that it's like, oh, hi, I'm your great aunt Gertrude, but some woman could come up to you on the street and be like, hey, I'm your great aunt Gertrude, you're going to get a lot of money in a few days.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, wow, thanks, that's awesome. Wow, this person just told me that my great aunt, and then everyone would just look at you like, why would you believe that?
Yeah, you wouldn't believe somebody they walked up to you, but you believe some kind of thing coming through this board, if indeed that's what it is.
Or person, or whatever.
Yeah.
Plus, how do you know the medium's not messing with you?
Well, sure. And let me give our numbers again. I never do that. People think we don't welcome callers. We do. The numbers, of course, locally 401-766-1240, or from anywhere in the U.S. and Canada, 800-449-1240. Station on the dial 1240. That's how you can remember the number, I guess. So in any case, people are welcome to call in. All right. So I think that's so they're acting like they're dead. They're coming through mediums and Ouija boards and saying, well, I'm dead, and this is who I was, and I'm your distant ancestor or some kind of thing. And people have often the Ouija board seems to be being rehabilitated lately, Ben. At least that.
What do you mean?
Well, in the sense that there seems to be more positive feeling for it than there was 20 years ago. At least from my perspective, people often write to us and say, "Well, what are you doing talking about the Ouija board? I use it and have no problem with it in this business."
I mean, I think the icing on that Ouija board cake, so to speak, would be I saw a furniture set designed as like a Ouija board where where the dial thing was like the coffee table and the board
Are
itself.
you serious?
Yeah, and the coffee table was the rug underneath and had like love seats, and I was just like, why?
Well, naturally, parasites would encourage this because they can push buttons. They're unfortunately, unlike mosquitoes and other parasites, they are very intelligent. They learn about you, and they learn quickly, and they push buttons in order to pump anger and fear out of you and annoyance so they can eat. That's really what it comes down to. That's how they live.
Yeah.
So in any case, I think Ouija boards are one of the main dinner bells that they use. So again, maybe is it possible that someone might actually come through on that? I suppose it is. Someone that is what it says it is, or someone who's, but I just can't see that being used. As I've often compared it with, you want to meet your neighbor, you want to contact somebody, and so you take a bulldozer and KO their front living room wall.
Hello,
instead
neighbor.
of waiting for them to come out and work in their garden and say, hey, hello, I'm so-and-so. The violence with which these things can punch holes in the boundaries of space-time does not attract good things.
No, it's like sharks.
Yeah.
Yeah, like sharks.
Exactly.
It's terrifying. And
people's naivete and even arrogance at times will be a problem for this. All right, so that's essentially it. So I don't think these. The other question, somebody even wrote in, and I thought of this too. If everything that we can conceive of does exist somewhere in the multiverse, there must be spirits of the dead somewhere in the multiverse, simply because we can conceive of that. All right?
Yeah.
I accept that, but it's like worlds in which human beings can fly. Physicists will tell you that the laws of physics being different from many worlds than they are here, that those worlds would be extremely rare. They would exist, but be extremely rare. I think that's the case with the spirits. I think that worlds in which human beings can become spirits, totally incorporeal beings, are there, but they're rare. If and when they would manifest here, I've never seen it. And that's, 43 years later. So anyway, there we are.
On that note.
Okay. So, what else is going on?
No, nothing.
All right. Well, we have one from Liz in Douglas, Massachusetts.
Alrighty, so Liz writes to us, I looked through your podcasts, thanks for them and not charging for them. I do not see any shows about vampires. They are very popular now, and do you plan to do a show on them? What is your thought on vampires, and can they exist? I think we did. No, I don't think we did a specific show on vampires.
I don't think we did a specific show. They come up because I think that these parasites we were always talking about.
Yeah, but not like the blah, suck your blood vampires.
Well, right. Yeah,
like that.
Well, I think the parasites are responsible for the original legends of vampires because that's what they do. The actual vampires themselves, I think a long time ago we met, because in my book Faces at the Window, there is a chapter on the vampires of Rhode Island. Because in southern New England, and I think probably elsewhere too, around, I suppose, the time of the American Revolution, up to about the 1890s, believe it or not, which is yesterday historically, there was a belief that in vampires, and I'm still trying to figure out where that belief came from.
Germany. I don't know.
Well, probably Germany or Eastern Europe, certainly, but it is very much like the beliefs of the Eastern Europeans. And now that does not necessarily correspond with the movies and the books that we read about it.
No.
The actual belief was, and it was reflected in New England at least at the time, was that a certain people could become vampires through an evil spirit, and they would prey not on just anybody, but on their own relatives. Okay? Now, I can see the whole idea of disease spreading through a family as being partially responsible for that legend. But on the other hand, you have reports, sometimes by multiple people, of the dead person appearing by the side of their sister or brother or something after the fact. So this is what's going on. And this is what supposedly occurred in... I'm thinking particularly of the Mercy Brown case in Exeter, Rhode Island.
Oh, yes.
And I first found out about that when I was a reporter down there in the late 70s at the dear old Patuxent Valley Daily Times, now the Kent County Daily Times. And I was a writer of history as well, so I would write a lot of features on the history of the area, and around Halloween I came upon that. And now everybody drags that story out at Halloween. And it was first written about in 1894, I believe, in a rather distinguished Providence literary publication, where they were saying that a family in Exeter was considering this remedy for vampires. They were going to exhume the body, and I apologize if this is rather vivid, but cut out the heart and burn it on a and the stone on which they did that, on the advice of a doctor, can still be seen in that cemetery. Now, the thing that really got me was these were the Browns of Exeter. These were not country bumpkins. These were people who were one of the most descendants of some of the most distinguished colonial gentry in the history of this state. Brown University in Providence, founded by one of the Browns, and these were rural gentleman farmer types. And their daughter Mercy had died of what at the time they would, I guess, call consumption, which is really pulmonary tuberculosis, as we would call it today. And the whole thing got out of control, and I don't know if it was out of control, but the doctor advised this remedy because he couldn't think of anything else. One of the brothers was taken ill as well. He went out west to try and recover. But I mean, it seems to me this is just tuberculosis spreading through a family. Of course, that's highly contagious. But there seemed to be apparitions of the girl, and when the body was exhumed, she was found to be she looked like she was in the pink of health, full of fresh blood, according to the witnesses. And of course, that could be explained by the fact that she died in the winter, and she would not have been buried until the ground thawed. And in that case, there would have been no deterioration. She would have just frozen. All right. Yeah. So again, apologies for the vivid nature of that, but that's what happened. Now, that was repeated on a number of occasions in various parts of New England in that whole century, from the time of the Revolution up through and past the 1870s up to the 1890s. But when I found that in the Providence Public Library all those years ago, I couldn't believe that a family at that late date was still contemplating that kind of remedy, that kind of thing. And so, but they did it, and it was reported in that contemporary media source. So there it was. But as far as I know, that was the last time that occurred. Now so the belief in the vampires was a far cry from any actual vampire experiences, other than the people who had the sightings. Yeah. So I don't really believe it. I think that there are examples of medical conditions which would account for it. Also, this leads into the question of lycanthropy. Werewolves, right? They tend to be, I don't know, they seem to be being rehabilitated as well in the literature, in movies and things. Yeah. And, it's amazing what people believe. There's a whole zombie business and all this stuff. It's incredible what people will believe. See, the terrible disease known as lupus is where hair can at times grow in different parts of the body, is sometimes considered responsible for some of the legends of werewolves and lycanthropy and this sort of thing, and shape-shifting in general. It all gets into some of these ancient beliefs.
Well, I heard another story about that too, where it was some guy who had lupus, who was actually schizophrenic or whatever, and thought he was a wolf. And so he'd go on killing sprees and such. So I heard that was where they came from. Anyway,
there are all sorts of psychiatric conditions that create problems here. So I don't actually think that there are really vampires in the classical sense. But again, people say, "Aha, Paul, somewhere in the multiverse there must be."
There are weird communities of people who call themselves vampires.
That's really sick.
Yeah, it's really it's weird.
Yeah, they actually drink. It's weird. It's disgusting. But if there are in the multiverse somewhere, they don't seem to be here. Whether the crossovers, I don't know. So that's the best way we can answer that. But there's the final one here on the Facebook. We didn't get to any of the others, actually, just through the Facebook ones. I wanted to get to the last one before we end tonight, because it's interesting.
Okay, so Carl from Maine writes to us, I was just reading about two women who wrote books, and they said they were dictated by the ghost of Mark Twain. Could this be possible? Oh, didn't we have another question like this last night?
We had a question like that just last night, yeah. Although it didn't have to do with Mark Twain, it had to do with Charles Dickens.
Oh, right.
All the guys from the 19th century. Well, I actually know a little bit about that, Carl. There was a woman named Emily Grant Hutchings. She wrote a book called Jap Heron that she said was dictated to her through a Ouija board by Mark Twain. Believe it or not, you can find the book on Amazon. And it actually says in the title that it was came through a novel written through a Ouija board. Right?
Is it any good?
I did. I looked at it years ago. It didn't really have the style of Mark Twain. It was all right. She wrote several other books as well under her own name, but she actually knew Mark Twain.
Oh, did she?
Who died in 1910, and he lived in Hartford.
Oh,
as a matter of fact.
Right.
And he corresponded with her and gave her advice on her writing. Now, I don't know if he gave her enough to write something that supposedly was by him, but he himself would have had some pungent comments about this allegation that he was dictating a book through the Ouija board. Because when he did, he seemed to have lost his wit. You can't imagine Mark Twain without his wit. There was another author who did not know Twain, Mildred Swanson. She wrote a diary of her supposed communications, again through a Ouija board, with Mark Twain. Right. And so it wasn't actually a novel dictated by him, but this Emily Grant Hutchings did. So, you can always, it's still in print. You can get it and see what you think. Is it possible? Well, sure it's possible, because as we said last night on our CBS edition, people are really one mass mind. There's a certain unity among all of us, and in one or another part of the multiverse, you could be, and probably are, Mark Twain, right? In one form or another. So there can be a sort of a conjunction of minds there, because it's really one mind. I mean, it's a tough concept, but that's what it seems to be in that realm of the physics of consciousness. So sure, you could be, I suppose, writing a book but then again, it's still you writing it. So I think that there might be, under certain circumstances, a certain legitimacy to this. But I think in most cases you're dealing with somebody who wants to sell a book, and if they can convince people, and you can convince people of anything, convince people that this is a matter of a dictation that's occurred through a Ouija board, then so much the better for your publicity. So I don't know. I think that might have been the case here. What say you, Ben?
No, I tend to agree with that.
Yeah.
I just feel like it's weird that the Ouija board is involved. So that's the thing that sort of is making me scratch my head at this.
Well, exactly. And last night, again, it's a very similar question. People coming up with books supposedly by Charles Dickens. There were several that I recall, were supposedly not written by means of a Ouija board. One woman in England said that Charles Dickens simply appeared and dictated the thing to her over just into her ear. All right. I think it's a rather disconcerting experience.
Yeah.
The other thing was about Mozart, that question too. And supposedly pieces of music have been written, supposedly dictated or inspired by Bach or Mozart or some of the other great composers. And the example was brought up in the question of a distant cousin of ours, Julia Ward Howe, who woke up earlier than she usually would. It was still dark, and just felt compelled to write down the Battle Hymn of the Republic. All right, and she was considered the author of that. So there are connections, but whether it's actually occurred as advertised is another question on that. So I don't.
Yeah, that's an entirely different kettle of fish.
Exactly. So I don't.
We do have time for another email.
Okay,
a short one.
Here's a relatively short one. This is from Jim A. in Auburn, Massachusetts.
Alrighty, so Jim writes to us. Hi guys, your recent show on the nature of evil as illustrated by the Connecticut...
Oh, this has to do with the Newtown shootings. This is from last year. Some of these emails go back to the 2009, 2010. I'm sorry. Sorry, Ben. Go ahead.
This is January of this year. So
okay.
Anyway, evil as illustrated by the Connecticut school attack left me fascinated but depressed. I understand your point that people are responsible for their own actions and state of society, but the parasites can exploit that. You often talk about people and families controlling the influence of parasites in their own lives. Do you see any way that we as a society or species can limit their influence before we destroy ourselves?
Well, that's a hard-hitting question. Yeah, in the wake of the terrible Newtown school shootings a year ago, we did a show on evil, which very interestingly, the podcast disappeared. Yeah. And we tried to repeat it using the same script on another occasion, but I don't know, that really disconcerted me in a way that we didn't have that show. We had, as it happens, a show reporter in that area, for several years now, and she has been sending us reports of a lot of things that we have not reported on the air having to do with that school shooting, because, first of all, we're not a news show, and secondly, I don't like to speculate over much about conspiracies and things of this kind that we really don't get into. I mean, you have to be really careful with that sort of thing. So, in any case, that's the incident being referred to, as you can imagine. The idea that people and families can control the influence of parasites, we've discussed that. Do you see any way that we as a society or a species can limit their influence before we destroy ourselves? I think that there are, I don't know how to put this, but there are times when parasites can and have destroyed worlds. That comes from our ancient legends, our ancient scriptures. I'm thinking particularly of Hindu scriptures, and other documents that reflect the remote history of our species. I think also that certain people and beings we've run into in the course of paranormal work, and that I've run into in the course of paranormal work, and was inadvertently communicated with, and whom I believe to be reliable, and indicated the concern, as we have, because these are just neighbors of ours. They're not enlightened masters, and they don't really know any more than we do, except that some are more aware of the parallel worlds than we are, that we have a certain amount of concern and danger from these parasites, because they have what apparently the sharks do, such as feeding frenzies at certain times, depending on what the source may be. They're very strange critters. Over the years, I've identified maybe 9 species of these things, and they are not nice. They will pretend to be, I suppose, Charles Dickens or whoever, or they'll pretend to be your Aunt Gertrude, as Ben says, or whoever. And they are not to be believed, and they can be controlled by positive energy, keeping positive feelings in your family, love, faith, good things, humor in a positive sense, and this is what maybe Jim is referring to. Now, I think that if we as a society try to be more positive, that will be a big step forward. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of negative things happening now. Nations that really shouldn't have them. Nobody should have nuclear weapons, I guess. And Einstein warned about that once the genie's out of the bottle, you're probably never going to get them back in again before there's a big disaster. You can just imagine, just on that front, how parasites might be trying to manipulate things. And again, not to be paranoid, not to be conspiracy theorist type people, but these things are worthy of consideration and concern. So, all right. So enough on that unsavory subject, but right. Keep it positive. That's the thing. All right, well, that's about all we have time for this evening.
Alrighty. So don't forget to visit our show website, BehindTheParanormal.com, where you can find over 500 free podcasts of all of our past shows. You can also check out our site at www.newenglandghosts.com, where there are case studies and photos, along with articles by my dad.
And find my books on Barnes & Noble, such as we referred to tonight, Barnes & Noble Look, e-reader, and Amazon Kindle, Amazon.com, and the usual places. But if you buy them directly at our show website, BehindTheParanormal.com, I will be happy to sign them for you, if that gives you any kind of thrill, and you will help us keep all those podcasts free, over 500 of them. Also on our sites, you'll find direct links to the several charities Ben and I have adopted and that we mentioned, including, again, USA Cares and Canadian Veterans Advocacy. Now, on our CBS Radio edition of the show on Sunday, December 22nd in Boston, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Windsor, and Seattle, Vancouver, we will welcome back. We will have, this script does not have the name. It's, why
are you pointing at me?
Oh, no, Ed Decker. Becker. I'm sorry,
yes,
that's embarrassing.
There we go.
Ed Becker, very well-known best-selling author, who wrote the A Haunting book, which was his own experience and his wife's experience on that, and it's going to be quite interesting because we're going to compare some notes on hauntings we've experienced, so it should be cool.
Cool. And next Monday, December 23rd, right here on WOON 1240 and ONWorldwide.com, we will welcome back the great Rosemary Ellen Guiley for a look at shadow people. And so we're going to leave you this evening with a thought.
Wait. We better tell people that the show is going to be at 5 o'clock.
Right. Yes.
Not at 6. It's only that one time because we're making Milk Fund.
Yes, we're making way for Romeo Berthiaume, and a special event for the Milk Fund.
Right. So we'll be on it live at 5 o'clock o'clock rather than 6 just for next week, the 23rd.
Alrighty, so that is about all the time that we have. I'm Ben Eno.
And I'm Paul Eno. Thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey. See you next time at 5 o'clock.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.